Change isn't just coming, it's already here. This is Ask for Change podcast, hosted by leadership expert Meridith Elliott Powell. Brings you weekly conversations with leaders and experts who are redefining success in a world of disruption. Let's begin today's journey and turn uncertainty into your competitive advantage.
Let's turn uncertainty into your competitive advantage. Hey, I'm Meridith Elliott Powell, and welcome to Ask for Change. I am super excited today about not only our guest, but the topic. I want to introduce you to a certified speaking professional, business growth expert, Ken Hartley. Now, Ken has just written an incredible book. I think if you want to understand uncertainty and change, I think, Ken, one of the most amazing things you've done is go back to history. I think we overlook history way too much to understand how to navigate today's marketplace. But he's written a brand new book called Calling the Presidents, where he's going to teach us leadership strategies, expert, everything that we need to know that we could learn from our presidents. Now, Ken, when I was doing a little bit of research here, you not only showed us what we can learn from them, but also some of the mistakes that they made along the way. So, Ken, welcome to the show.
I am so honored to be here with you. I've been a long-time admirer of the work that you do. Of course, not just the speaking that you do, which is phenomenal. I finally got to hear in person, which was amazing, about uncertainty and about how to thrive with that. But then also your work with NSA. I've just been such an admirer of all that you do. It's incredible.
Thank you. Well, let's dive in, because I have just started the book, because you just gave me my own personalized copy. But I got to tell you, Ken, I was really, when I saw you back there at the book table with this book, I was really attracted to it because, as I said, I think we underutilize the gifts that history gives us to really understand how to navigate, today's marketplace. But I'm really interested, what called you to write this book?
Well, this has been a lifelong pursuit for me. I've always been interested in presidents. When I was a kid, when other people wanted to be policemen or superheroes, I wanted to be the president.
Nice.
And that started from my grandfather, who lived in Independence, Missouri, and he was actually Harry Truman's electrician.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, which was kind of a cool thing to have. So the day that I was, right after I was born, he got a little Gideon Bible. He walked over to the Truman house and knocked on the door, and Harry Truman answered, which was the day and age it was. And he got that Bible, and Harry Truman signed that Bible for me.
That's amazing.
And so I still have that today. And that started an interest because my mom showed that to me when I was very young. And I just started learning about presidents. I wanted to know about them.
So, most times when you interview authors, they've done their research based on maybe making some phone calls, doing a lot on ChatGPT, doing the Google, but you really went out, rolled up your sleeves. I mean, you've been to libraries, you've been to hometowns, you've been to, houses of where presidents were born and grew up. What all went into writing this book?
Well, it started with the first thing it started with was a curiosity. Every book I've ever written has started with some kind of question that I wanted answered. I'm by nature a very curious person, always want to know how and why things are the way they are. And so I wanted to understand why it was that I could say George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, Theodore Roosevelt, and everybody goes, oh, yeah, I know who those guys are. But if I say Chester Arthur, Franklin Pierce, Martin Van Buren, most people go, who? And yet they all held the same office as the other ones, but some are remembered in perpetuity, others are completely forgotten, or a trivia question most people miss. And so I wanted to find out what made these people tick. And really the way that I could get in close proximity to them, the closest proximity, was to visit their sites, to walk where they walked, to read their speeches, see the words that they wrote down on paper, the letters they wrote to people. Anytime I could use that as source material rather than just simply a biography, I always dug in, because their own words really give you a lot of insight into who they are and who they were, what they believed, and what they thought about America.
So now I'm intrigued. When it comes down to it, did you solve that question that you've got as to why we know who some presidents are and we remember them, and some are just like you said, a question we miss in a trivia game?
I did. That question is answered, and the short version of it is it really came into focus with Theodore Roosevelt, and Theodore Roosevelt made a statement that for a while really wrecked me. He said, if you take the Civil War away from Abraham Lincoln, he's a very average president. And I struggled with that because I thought, Abraham Lincoln, average? He's not average. He's like the best president ever.
Right.
The more I thought of it and the more I considered his words, I found some wisdom there, because true leaders are made for their moment. It's a moment in time, and they choose to rise up and to meet the needs of the people that they're leading. They're serving the needs of those people. And so the leaders that are remembered the longest are the ones who serve their people the best at that moment in time.
So, this podcast, this show is all about uncertainty and change. And certainly our presidents have experienced a lot of uncertainty and change. You mentioned Abraham Lincoln and the Civil War. You have, Roosevelt during the Great Depression, Franklin Roosevelt during the Great Depression. When you look at this and you covered every single president, what are some of the things that really stood out to you? What surprised you? What are the greatest lessons you feel like you learned?
I think the biggest thing is that all of these, the 45 men, 47 terms, but 45 men are all very, very human. Every single one of them are flawed. And if you look for the flaws, they're not difficult to find. But they thought for that moment they could make a difference and do something. Now, there were some that, they just sought out the power, but there were some that thought, I'm going to step in and do something. And I think the two that surprised me the most were a guy here from Tennessee, James K. Polk, who actually was from North Carolina at first. That's where he was born. And he did something that nobody else had ever done. He said, I'm going to run for one term. I'm going to serve one term. Don't ask me to do another one. And I'm going to accomplish 4 things. And then I'm going to walk away. And nobody else had ever done that. He wasn't interested in the power. He thought, I can walk in, I can do this, turn around and walk out. And he did it. He accomplished all 4 things in 4 years. And then he left. They wanted him to run again, and he said no. Another one would be Grover Cleveland, who was the 22nd and 24th president. And I think the most impressive part about him was his integrity. His biographer is a guy named Troy Senik, and there's really not a library for Grover Cleveland. You had to dig deep to find anything about the guy, because he was so humble. He didn't consider putting his papers out there or anything else. He just didn't. And so to find him is to dive into his speeches, which meant I had to go back into used bookstores, find material from the late 1800s to research this guy, and ended up buying some very old books and just reading through what the man wrote. But Troy Senik, his biographer, I think summed him up the best. He said he had an integrity of an almost superhuman level. And really did. In his famous statement, when there was something that he had done that he shouldn't have done, and when his political opponents brought it to light and his operatives said, what do you want us to do with this? He said, tell the truth. Just tell them.
That is very rare in politics.
Is that not rare in politics? And his mindset was, either they're going to go, okay, he did this one thing and be okay with it, or they're not. Either way, they're in charge. And he would say over and over again, they're the boss. I'm not the boss. They're the boss. And ultimately, America agreed with him, not once, but twice.
What are some of the, most uncertain times you feel, which presidents faced some of the biggest uncertainties, and what did they do well through it? Like, what can we learn, and what, if anything, should we avoid from their experiences?
I think there's never been a president that's inherited more uncertainty than Harry Truman.
That's true.
You had Franklin Roosevelt, this iconic leader who was the only one to be elected 4 times. That speaks volumes to what America thought of him. But Harry Truman was his vice president for the 4th term. He was picked as a compromise candidate because the other candidate, Henry Wallace, who was there prior, was thought to be leaning too far to one side of the political spectrum. And Truman was brought in to balance out the ticket and pull in votes. But FDR's quote was, doesn't matter who the vice president is as long as I'm on the ticket. Wow. And he was the guy. Well, when Truman became the vice president, he knew nothing. He only met with FDR one time during the election cycle. And then after he was president, he only met with him 2 times, and FDR told him nothing. So when FDR died in April of 1945, Truman inherited the entire World War. He knew nothing about the Manhattan Project. He had never been told about it. He knew nothing about what the strategy was over there. And so he literally walked in blind. And out of every president, Germany was pretty much done by then.
Right.
Japan was very much in doubt. Nobody knew how long that was going to go on. They still estimated it was going to cost somewhere between 1.5 and 2 million lives on both sides to win that war. And this was handed to Harry Truman. So within days of him taking office, he found out, wait a minute, we've got a bomb. I didn't know we had a bomb. And then he found out what FDR was going to do, and he implemented some of those strategies. So yes, he made the incredibly difficult and horrific choice to use those weapons, which FDR was already going to do. That was in his writings. He was going to use them himself to end the war. There was never an intention of invading Japan. So he had to make that choice. And then after that, he had to figure out, how are we going to rebuild this? And so he did something that I don't know that any other president has ever done. If you go back to the Great Depression, and it was called Hoover's Depression, kind of unjustly, but
Right.
it's called his depression. And Herbert Hoover was a guy who self-made millionaire. He came from abject poverty and amassed a fortune in the 1920s of $120 million.
Wow.
I mean, unheard of. He didn't take a salary while he was president. He gave everything to charities. And when he was the Commerce Secretary under Calvin Coolidge, he told him, look, you're going to have an issue here with Wall Street if you don't do something about it. And within months of him taking office in 1929, everything blew up. And so everything he tried to do was a failure. It didn't work. And so he just became synonymous with failure. Well, after World War II, Harry Truman picks up the phone and he calls Herbert Hoover. And the exchange, it's in Truman's writings. It was from a recording that a guy named Merle Miller did with him. And Hoover picks up the phone and Truman goes, Mr. President, this is Harry Truman. Now, Harry Truman is the president.
That's right.
The president.
Mr. President.
And Hoover didn't know what to do. And he reaches across the aisle to a supposed political opponent and brings him in because he says there's nobody more qualified. This Herbert Hoover in World War I, it was credited with putting food and shelter back into Europe. And Truman knew that and said, there's nobody more qualified to help Europe rebuild than you. He said, I'd love to come over to the hotel. He's at the Shoreham Hotel. Come over there and talk to you. Herbert Hoover said, I can't let you do that, Mr. President. He said, I thought you might say that. The car's on the way. Brought him to the White House, and Harry Truman came from around the desk in the Oval Office and sat next to Hoover, told him that. And as he's talking to him, Hoover stops. And as Truman looks up, tears are coming down Hoover's face. And he says, can I have a moment? And he says, sure. And Hoover leaves. And Truman said, the reason that happened is because nobody had anything to do with this guy. And here was this potential in the middle of this incredible uncertainty in Europe as to what was going to happen to them. Were they going to turn to democracy? Were they going to turn to capitalism, socialism? Nobody really knew. And he stepped in and said, the first thing they have to have is food, water, shelter. And there's nobody better than this guy. He didn't care about politics or anything else. He put the right person in the position. And that one decision in the middle of uncertainty helped rebuild Europe.
And then obviously made Europe be open to not becoming communists.
Exactly, because that was the thing. The Allies took a bunch of land, and of course, the Soviet Union was part of that.
Yeah.
And then the Allies got done and said, okay, hey, here it comes, Poland, this is yours again. Hey, here you go. Germany, we're actually going to let them create a government for themselves. France, back to your own government. And Russia went, I don't think I want to give the land back. And all of a sudden, they went, wait a minute, what? And thus began the Cold War.
Right. So when you look at, did you discover any real difference between the modern day presidents and some of our earlier presidents?
Well, I think the most remarkable difference has got to be George Washington. George Washington won a military battle over the greatest empire in the world. The British Empire was number one, greatest navy, greatest army, and he won a victory that nobody thought he could win. And in the history of the world, nobody had ever won a victory like that and not become a king or an emperor or a military dictator. It had never happened. And Washington laid the power down. He wasn't in it for the power. And when when they talked to him later on in Newburgh, New York, this is a paraphrase, but he basically told them, look, his army wanted to go in and take over and install him as the leader. And he said, I did not do this to become a king. I fought this war to become a farmer, and so that you can do the same thing.
Yeah.
And when he became president, everybody thought, and Alexander Hamilton pushed for this, he wanted the presidents to be the same way as Supreme Court justices. You're president until you die, until you decide you don't want to do it or you die. Well, Washington said, no, 2 terms is plenty. And he laid it down. And his opponent in the war, King George III, when he heard the news Washington was going to lay down the presidency, he said, if he does that, he'll be the greatest man alive. And he did it. So there was this whole idea that's different from today, in that at the beginning, political service was really service. There was no prestige to it. There was barely any salary. Most people don't know that when Washington went back to Mount Vernon, he was almost bankrupt.
Yes.
He wasn't working Mount Vernon's plantation. He couldn't make any money from it. So all these presidents that were serving, their personal lives, their finances were going under. And it truly was a menial service position, and not so much the superstar prestigious ones that we see today. And again, this is a personal opinion. This is Ken's opinion, but I think we could do well to return to some of that where it was really, truly service.
I would agree. I had I think that too, if you want to lead through an uncertain marketplace, that is your mindset. It has to be one of service, not one of self-preservation, about really looking in and truly doing the right thing. I was stunned because I just finished the book on George Washington. I was really stunned at what financial sacrifice it wasn't, not only for Washington, but his entire cabinet. I mean, they really walked away from their lives for no money whatsoever and served. And it was to true detriment to their farms, to their businesses, and to their families.
Very much so. John Adams in particular, there's a book that it's actually over here on this shelf behind that board, but it's the letters between Abigail and John Adams. And there are two sources I used for him, which was those letters and then the letters between Thomas Jefferson and Adams. And it's incredible source material for the founding of the country. But if you read Abigail Adams, that woman was one of the most brilliant political strategists of the time. She was brilliant. And John Adams considered her very much an equal, which at that time you didn't hear much of. And he would consult with her. And every letter would begin the same way, my dearest friend. And he would go from there. Yes, every letter like that. And so you had John Adams, who spent years away from his wife while he was negotiating in France for ships, for supplies, negotiating with the Dutch for financing. It's overseas. We think now, okay, well, it's just a quick jaunt overseas. It was weeks on a boat to get over there, and it was not a lock that you were going to make it either. It was perilous. He did all of that in service of the country, and honestly to the detriment of his family, to the point that he and Abigail eventually they had to reconnect after years. It was like a separation.
Right.
As if they just separated as a couple and then came back together later. Now, they didn't think about divorce back then. It's certainly not the way it is today, but they were not together. And all they had was letters back and forth. And then sometimes the letters didn't make it for various reasons. So there was one point where I didn't hear from him for more than 2 months. And that was not good for him.
Yeah, it's amazing to me. I remember reading about George Washington, Teddy Roosevelt as well, that the amount of time you would go without seeing your spouse or significant other. I mean, when they left, they would leave for months at a time, and you would, and the letters would take so long to get to them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then you've got, Theodore Roosevelt, who went through the most catastrophic of tragedies on
Yes.
February 14th. It was on Valentine's Day.
Mhm.
He was on the floor of the New York State Assembly, got a letter that his wife had a baby. Great news. And then within 15 minutes, he got a telegram saying, your wife is at the point of death. Come home. And when he got to the door, it took him all night to get there. He gets to the door. It's after midnight the following day, which is the 14th, opens the door, and his brother answers the door and says, mother is almost dead.
Yeah.
He went with my wife, and they both were at the point of death. He lost his mother and his wife on the same day.
And he was very close to both of them.
Very much so, to the point that Alice, the baby that she had, was Alice Lee, but TR would only call her Baby Lee. He would not allow the name Alice to be uttered in his presence because of the pain.
Because of the pain of it, and that is, I love the fact that you bring up, they all are flawed. Like, especially when we look down through history, we think about these great men and we think of them as perfect. But when you dive into their lives, they have flaws. And I think as leaders, we have flaws too. Do you have any thoughts? Were there any consistent traits across the most effective presidents, kind of regardless of their era or the challenges? Were there any consistent traits that you saw?
I would say two in particular. The service was a big one. If the intention going in there, I'm going to serve the needs of the people, and they saw the ones who saw Americans as their boss. When they had a lock on that, other things fell into place. And then the other aspect were the ones who were extremely willing to own their mistakes. When they made a mistake, which all of them did, there were some, like you have James Buchanan, which again, most people don't know. He was the one who preceded Lincoln. And after he returned home to Lancaster, Pennsylvania, he spent his time writing his memoirs in defense of what he had done while he was the president, which it could have effectively been titled Why I Was Right and Everybody Else Is Wrong. It did not sell well. But then you have Abraham Lincoln, who would constantly admit to his flaws, who had a tremendous self-deprecating humor about himself that was disarming to people. At one point during the Lincoln-Douglas debates, a lady in the crowd accused him of being two-faced. And in his own way, he looked at her and said, Madam, I leave it to you. If I had another face, do you think I'd choose this one? What a great answer.
Yeah.
So he owned his mistakes, and I think that is really a huge difference between a poor leader and a great one.
I would agree.
And I like to say it this way: what you don't own is eventually going to own you. If you own that mistake, you can get on top of it. But if you don't own it, it will own you for the rest of your life.
Yeah, if you could sit down with one president, to talk about anything and ask any leadership question, who would you? I won't limit it to one. You can go to two if you want to, because I bet that's pretty hard. Is there anyone that you'd really like to talk with, and what would you ask them if you could?
I would talk to Lincoln, first of all, and I would want to know, what is it that changed in you? What was the moment that changed you? Because if you look at his speeches during the Lincoln-Douglas debate, and even in his inaugural address, there are some very negative racial statements that he makes. And yet today he's the great emancipator. What was the event that caused you to morph and realize at first he was willing to do anything, any kind of compromise to hold the country together, whether it meant keeping slavery or doing away with it? He was okay. And then to go from that to, we have got to abolish slavery. It is an evil. It is wrong, which is where he is at the end of his presidency. I would go, what was the moment?
Right.
What was the moment you realized that? Because there are conjectures. One of them could be the Battle of Antietam, which was the bloodiest day in American history. Over 23,000 Americans died in one day, which is more than D-Day, 9/11, put together. So
Wow.
what was it? More, almost as much as the Vietnam War. Was it something that somebody said to you? But what was it that caused you to realize we cannot be a true country unless all are created equal and all have those equal rights, which led to the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the Constitution?
It's interesting to me, again, going back to this idea of being flawed. I was really amazed when I read about Washington, how much he was professed to be against slavery, but owned slaves his entire life and used them to run Mount Vernon. I think one of the things that is so good about reading history is you just realize it's so complicated. It's just none of these decisions were easy. None of these decisions were simple. Everything was complex. It was complicated, and it just involved so much.
And very intertwined as
Yes.
well. That's the extraordinary thing. It all kind of weaves together. So yeah, you had Washington. Jefferson owned more than any other
Yes.
founding father. And then, of course, his proclivities are there at Monticello, and it's
Mhm.
all proven DNA and everything else.
Yes.
Madison would be another. John Quincy Adams are the only two what I'd consider founding fathers who we know never owned a slave and considered it an abomination and evil, so they wouldn't do it, and they were as consistent as their word with all of that. So yeah, you had all of that going on, but there's also very much what I love is the tapestry of how history weaves together. So you have John Quincy Adams, who was appointed as a minister to Netherlands by George Washington. And when he died on the floor of the House of Representatives, he had a stroke on the floor. He was the only president to be a congressman after he was president. One of the people that helped carry him out was Abraham Lincoln.
Yeah.
He knew both Lincoln and Washington, only president to do both. And then at Lincoln's funeral procession through New York, if you look, there's a picture by Currier and Ives that is at the Theodore Roosevelt birthplace in New York. And if you see, you could look up in this window where the hearse is going by, and in that window is a young Theodore Roosevelt watching Abraham Lincoln's body be rolled through there. Profoundly impacted him. That's weaved together. So there's all sorts of historical quirks where all of these people are threaded together.
Unbelievable. So, it's hard to believe, but we are at the end of this podcast.
I so enjoyed this.
Me too. We'll have to come back and do it again.
Mhm.
I like to end with two questions, and you can answer them either way. How do people find out about you? How do they find out about the book? We'll definitely have all that information in the show notes. And then, what is your greatest piece of advice for people out there dealing with uncertainty, change, and the challenges with it? What is your greatest piece of advice? What did you learn from the book about turning uncertainty to competitive advantage?
I think the leaders who served the best understood their times, and change is part of it. There is no choice on change. None of us get that. Am I going to change or am I not? Change is all around us. And so the only choice we have is to embrace it or to shy away from it. Shying away means going backwards, and we're dooming ourselves to obscurity by doing that. But if we're able to embrace that and say, I'm going to move forward with this, even though, yes, it can be fearful. Yes, it can be uncertain. But I would say it this way: every single thing you have ever wanted as a leader to be effective is just on the other side of that fear and uncertainty. If you're willing to separate, it's there.
Excellent. And how do people find out about you? How do they find out about Calling the Presidents?
You can get Calling the Presidents by going to callingthepresidents.com. That's the easiest way to get it. And my website is kenhartley.com, HARTLEY.com. And it's like you, I'm a speaker and love talking to people about leadership and communication. Would be delighted to collaborate with any of you.
Well, I think the thing that's so interesting is that to listen to you present on stage, not only do you do all these incredible magic tricks and you're really fun, but this book is so full of such great stories. I mean, it's so intriguing to read, really interesting to listen to. So I hope that you grace quite a few stages with this book. Thank you so much for joining us, Ken. Thank all of you for joining us. We'll see you right back here next week for another episode of Ask for Change. And remember, together, we're going to turn all of this uncertainty into your greatest competitive advantage. I'll see you next week.